The old man's hands, gnarled and trembling, held a single sheet of paper. It was pristine, folded with a precision that spoke of a ritual practiced over a lifetime. He stood by the hearth, where a fire, small but fierce, cast dancing shadows on the walls of his silent cabin. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, a faint, lingering sadness. This wasn't a chore. It was a confession he performed every year, a silent sacrament. He never read the words, just stared at the blankness of the page, a ghost of the thousands of words he had already written in his mind and burned year after year. The paper itself felt like a living thing, heavy with a weight no one else could see. And then, without a sound, he let it fall into the flames. The corner curled, turned brown, then black, and dissolved into ash. He watched it disappear, not with relief, but with a strange, hollow emptiness. He lived in a world of muted colors and silent routines, a ghost in his own life. His home was a museum of sorrow, every object a monument to a past he couldn't escape. The dust on the mantel, the clock that had stopped at 3:17, the single child's shoe placed carefully on the bookshelf. Each was a testament to a life that had ceased to move forward. He was a man defined by absence, his voice a forgotten melody, his laughter a distant echo. The world outside moved on, but he remained anchored to that one tragic day. He had become a stranger to himself, his own reflection a blurry outline of the man he used to be. The unwritten letter he held each morning was a conversation with the past, a silent plea for a forgiveness he was too broken to seek from the living. His pain wasn't loud. It was the quiet hum of a refrigerator in the dead of night, the persistent ache that settles deep in the bones. The peculiar silence of his home was a choice, a self-imposed exile from a world that had moved on without him. He had found solace in the quiet hum of his own solitude, in the empty spaces that once buzzed with life. He would walk through the rooms, his hand brushing against the cold surfaces of furniture, a silent greeting to the ghosts he lived with. The unblinking gaze of the clock, frozen in time, was a constant reminder of the moment his world came to a shattering halt. It was a moment he replayed in his mind 1,000 times a day, each time adding a new layer of guilt, a new reason to believe he deserved this loneliness. His ritual with the letter was a way of cleansing, a futile attempt to burn away the memories that haunted him. But the fire never consumed the guilt. It only turned the paper to ash, leaving the heart of the matter, the raw, festering wound, untouched. But the silence was about to be broken. A small boy, no older than 7, had appeared at his door. He wasn't a delivery person, or a lost hiker, or anyone he had seen before. The boy just stood there, holding a small, broken toy train, his eyes wide and curious. He didn't speak, just held out the train, a silent offering. The old man, startled by this unexpected intrusion, merely stared. He hadn't seen a child on his property in years. This wasn't part of his routine. The boy's presence was an anomaly, a disruption to the carefully constructed quietude of his existence. The little train, with its snapped wheel, was a mirror of his own broken life, a physical representation of something that once moved forward, but was now stuck in time. The boy's innocent gaze held no judgment, no pity, just a simple request for help. If you've ever lost something that felt like part of your soul, stay with this story. Don't scroll yet. What he finds next might break you in the best way. He looked at the boy, then at the train. His first impulse was to close the door, to retreat back into the comfortable silence of his solitude. But something in the child's eyes, a quiet earnestness, held him in place. It was the same look his own son had, a lifetime ago, when he'd bring him a toy to fix. That memory, sharp and sudden, was a punch to the gut. It was a memory he had meticulously buried under layers of silence and routine, a ghost he refused to acknowledge. He hadn't touched a tool in years. Not since he had to put them all away, a final act of surrender to a life he couldn't fix. The old man sighed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse, and without a word he took the broken train from the boy's hand. The cold plastic felt alien in his warm, calloused palm, a forgotten sensation. He could feel the weight of the child's hope, a fragile, unexpected burden. He led the boy to the workbench in the back of his garage, a space that was once the heart of his home. It was covered in dust sheets, a tomb for his past life as a skilled woodworker and craftsman. The tools lay beneath, silent and forgotten, their edges dulled by years of neglect. He pulled back a sheet, revealing a landscape of abandoned projects, a half-finished rocking horse, a small wooden boat with a missing mast. Each object was a testament to a dream that had been shattered. The boy, oblivious to the history of this place, just stared at the tools with wonder. He pointed to a small, intricate carving of a bird, its wings outstretched as if in flight. The old man hadn't looked at it in years, not since he carved it for his son's 11th birthday, a gift he never had the chance to give. A lump formed in his throat, and he quickly turned away, grabbing a small clamp to hold the broken train. The boy, named Liam, didn't talk much either. He just watched, his quiet company a stark contrast to the man's profound loneliness. He sat on a small stool, his feet swinging, his gaze fixed on the man's hands as they worked. The silence wasn't a void, it was a companion. The man found himself explaining the process, the names of the tools, the way to mend a broken thing. The words came out slow and hesitant at first, like a language he was relearning. He spoke of sanding and gluing, of careful, deliberate motions. He was talking to a child, but he was also talking to the ghost of himself, the man who once found purpose in creation. As he worked, he could feel a faint spark returning, a warmth in his chest he had long forgotten. He fixed the train's broken wheel with a small piece of metal and a steady hand, the familiar rhythm of the work a balm to his wounded soul. The next day, Liam came back, and the day after that. He didn't bring a broken toy this time. He just brought a small, wilted wildflower, a silent offering of friendship. The man, taken aback, accepted it, placing it in a glass of water on his workbench. It was an unspoken contract, a daily ritual that slowly began to replace the burning of the letters. They would sit in the garage, the man working on a piece of reclaimed wood, the boy sketching in a small notebook he had brought with him. There were still long stretches of silence, but they were no longer empty. They were filled with the quiet companionship of two souls who had found a common ground in solitude. The man found himself starting to look forward to the afternoons, to the small, daily presence of this child. He hadn't felt a sense of anticipation in years, not since his life had become a repeating cycle of loss and regret. This wasn't just about a boy and an old man. It was about the way a small, unplanned connection can break through the walls we build to protect our deepest wounds. It was about the silent language of shared space and quiet presence. The boy never asked about the past, never questioned the silence or the sadness that hung in the air. He just existed, a bright, unwavering point of light in the man's world of shadow. This small act of showing up day after day was more powerful than any words of comfort or sympathy. It was an acceptance of the man's reality, a silent promise to stay, no matter what. The boy didn't know the man's story, didn't know the weight of the letters he burned. He just saw a man who needed a hand, and in his own quiet way, he offered it. What would you do if the only way forward was through everything you'd buried? Keep watching, because this moment, this choice, will change everything. One rainy afternoon, the boy found a photograph tucked away in a drawer of the workbench. It was faded and curled at the edges, a relic of a happier time. In the photo, a young man, a mirror image of the old man, stood smiling, his arm around a boy with a mischievous grin. The boy in the photo was holding the very same toy train that Liam had brought to him. Liam, with a child's unfiltered honesty, looked at the photo, then at the man. "Is that you?" he asked, pointing to the boy. The old man's face went pale. He had forgotten that photo even existed, a painful fragment of a life he had tried to erase. He snatched it from the boy's hand and shoved it back into the drawer, a sudden, sharp gesture that made the boy flinch. The familiar walls of grief slammed shut again, the warmth of the last few days evaporating into the cold, damp air of the garage. Liam, sensing the shift, didn't push. He just quietly went back to his sketching, the silence now a heavy blanket instead of a comfortable companion. But the damage was done. The photograph was a Pandora's box, its contents now loose in the man's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, long after the boy had left, he pulled the photo out again. He stared at his own young face, full of a joy he no longer recognized. He saw his son's face, alive and laughing, a sharp contrast to the ghostly image that haunted his memories. He passed his thumb over the boy's face in the photo, a silent, aching caress. He had not spoken his son's name in 20 years. He had buried it along with the memories, the laughter, the love. But now, the name, Daniel, echoed in his mind, a sound he had forgotten. The next day, Liam came back with a new offering. Not a toy, but a small, worn, leather-bound book. "My mom says you like to write," he said, holding it out. The man's heart ached. The boy had somehow seen through the layers of his silence, had intuited the one thing he did in secret, the ritual of the letters. He took the book and opened it. The first page was blank, but the rest were filled with what looked like a child's story, illustrated with crayon drawings. Liam's story. It was a simple tale about a boy who found a broken bird and helped it fly again. The man looked from the book to the boy's trusting eyes. The narrative was simple, but the message was a profound one. The boy wasn't just offering a story, he was offering a mirror. He started reading the book every night after Liam left. He saw himself in the broken bird, unable to fly, stuck on the ground. He saw Liam as the kind-hearted boy who didn't give up on it. The story, so simple and pure, was slowly chipping away at the walls he had built. He started to feel a small, almost imperceptible shift inside him, a thawing of the frozen grief. He began to look at his old tools, not as relics of a failed past, but as instruments of healing. He picked up the half-finished rocking horse, its smooth wood a comfort in his hands. He started sanding, the familiar motion, a quiet meditation. He worked slowly, deliberately, as if he were tending to a fragile wound. Each layer of dust he cleared away, each smooth line he created, was an act of letting go of the past. He wasn't just building a rocking horse, he was rebuilding a part of himself. But the most difficult confrontation was yet to come. The unwritten letter, the one he had held just a few days ago, lay on his desk. He looked at it, then at Liam's book, and finally at the photograph of his son. The truth, the full, devastating truth, felt like a physical weight in his chest. He had been a successful architect, a creator of beautiful, grand buildings, but he was also a man who was so consumed with his work that he neglected the most important thing in his life, his family. The accident wasn't just an accident, it was a consequence of his carelessness. He had been on the phone arguing with a client when he ran a red light. His son, who was in the passenger seat, never stood a chance. The guilt was a suffocating blanket, a punishment he had willingly accepted. He had written the letters not for his son, but for himself, a constant reminder of his failure. He walked into the garage that evening, the space feeling different, no longer a tomb, but a workshop full of unfinished hope. The half-finished rocking horse stood on the workbench, a symbol of a life that could be finished, if he only chose to. He held the unwritten letter, the one he was supposed to burn, and stared at it. For 20 years, this piece of paper was his confession, his punishment, his only way of communicating with the son he had lost. But the boy, Liam, and his small, simple story about a broken bird had shown him a different path, the path of forgiveness, not just for others, but for himself. He knew he had a choice to make. He could continue to live in the past, a prisoner to his own grief, or he could finally choose to live again, to finish what he started, to heal the wound that had festered for so long. The choice was terrifying, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt like the only way forward. He slowly, deliberately, crumpled the letter into a small ball and tossed it into the recycling bin, a silent farewell to his old life. The next day, when Liam arrived, the man didn't lead him to the workbench. Instead, he led him to the small, overgrown patch of garden behind the house. He knelt down, and with a shaky hand he pointed to a patch of ground. "This," he said, his voice raspy from disuse, "is where my son used to plant his sunflowers." Liam's eyes widened, and he looked at the man, a silent question on his face. This was the first time the man had ever spoken about his son, the first time he had ever opened the door to the most painful part of his past. The words came out slowly, haltingly, but once they started, they flowed like a dam that had finally broken. He told Liam about the accident, about his own mistakes, about the years he spent punishing himself. He didn't look at Liam as he spoke, his gaze fixed on the ground, a silent plea for understanding. But he didn't need to look. He could feel the boy's quiet, accepting presence beside him, a silent assurance that he was not alone. Liam, without a word, reached out and took the man's hand. He didn't say he understood, didn't offer any platitudes. He just held his hand, a small, warm anchor in the storm of the man's confession. It was the first time in 20 years the man had felt the touch of another human being, a touch that was not rooted in pity or obligation, but in a simple, profound empathy. He looked at the boy, and for the first time, he saw not a mirror of his son, but a separate, beautiful human being who had chosen to see him, to hear him, when no one else would. The man felt a sob rise in his throat, a raw, guttural sound that had been trapped inside him for so long. He wept, not tears of grief, but tears of release, of a dam breaking, of a lifetime of pain finally pouring out. The boy just stood there, holding his hand, a silent witness to a man finally choosing to heal. That day, the man and the boy worked together to clear the garden. They pulled weeds, turned the soil, and planted new seeds, their hands working in a silent rhythm. The man's hands, which had only known how to hold a pen and a burning letter, were now covered in dirt, a testament to a life being reborn. He still thought of his son, but the memories no longer felt like a punishment. They felt like a part of his story, a part of the man he was, and a part of the man he was becoming. The past was not erased. It was integrated. The wounds were not gone. They were simply no longer bleeding. And when the sun set, the old man looked at the garden, at the tiny seeds that held the promise of new life, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker of hope. He realized that the greatest act of love he could offer his son was not to mourn him, but to live the life he had been so afraid to live. The world never saw him, but today you did, because sometimes all it takes to save a life is listening when no one else does. He walked away with nothing, except for the one thing he thought he had lost forever: hope.